Before the sound of engines, before the walls of cities, there was silence. A deep, white silence that stretched across the forests, plains, and mountains of early America. Winter had come, and the land was asleep beneath a blanket of snow. The rivers froze, the trees cracked in the cold, and the air turned sharp enough to sting the skin. It was the kind of cold that could swallow a careless traveler whole. Yet, somehow, the native peoples who lived here did not just survive it, they thrived. To the first Europeans who arrived centuries later, this seemed impossible. How could anyone live through such bitter cold without houses of stone or chimneys or woolen coats from distant lands? But the Native Americans had something far greater than those things. They had understanding. They knew the language of the land, and they had listened to it for thousands of winters. When the first frost came, they did not fear it. They prepared for it long before it arrived. Every tribe, from the icy north to the dry plains, had its own way of reading the signs of the changing season. The geese flying low, the color of the sky, the way the wind carried through the trees, all these told them that winter was near. The animals were their teachers, too. When the squirrels began storing nuts earlier, when the beavers thickened their lodges, the people knew it was time. For them, winter was not an enemy. It was a test, one that rewarded those who respected it. They gathered firewood, dried meat, cured hides, and built or repaired their homes. But more than that, they built relationships. In the months of plenty, they shared. In the months of scarcity, they depended on one another. No one faced the frost alone. In the early mornings before the sun rose, a thin mist would rise from the frozen rivers. Smoke curled from the tops of lodges, warm and steady against the pale light. Inside, families gathered close around a small fire, not a roaring blaze, but one that burned slow and sure, giving just enough heat to fill the air without filling the room with smoke. The scent of pine and dried meat hung in the air, and the quiet murmur of voices mixed with the sound of crackling wood. They did not waste fire. Every flame was precious. The elders taught that fire was alive, a living spirit that needed to be fed, cared for, and respected. It could save you or destroy you, depending on how you treated it. And so they learned to keep it steady, to use stones to hold the heat through the night, and to gather together for warmth rather than try to fight the cold alone. Their clothing was another kind of genius. Instead of woven cloth, they used what the land gave them. The hides of deer, buffalo, rabbit, and fox. They softened the leather with fat and smoke until it became both warm and breathable. The inner side was lined with fur, the outer side treated with oil to resist moisture. They layered their garments just as we do today, but without factories or machines. It was all made by hand, with care, with knowledge passed down like stories. And their homes, each tribe had found a way to make them perfectly suited to their world. The Plains tribes built tipis that could be packed and moved, yet when set up, could stay warm even in blizzards. The Great Lakes peoples made domed wigwams covered in bark and hides, insulated by snow itself. The Mandan and Hidatsa built earth lodges so solid that they could hold heat for days. The Inuit shaped igloos of snow, the coldest material becoming their greatest protection. The people had learned that warmth didn't always come from fire. Sometimes it came from understanding how to live with the cold, not against it. To them, the snow was not a curse but a blanket. It muffled sound, slowed the world, and reminded everyone to rest. In winter, life itself moved differently. The days were shorter and work was gentler. It was a time for mending, storytelling, and remembering. Around the fire, children listened to tales of ancestors, spirits, and animals that spoke in the old ways. The stories were lessons in disguise: how to hunt wisely, how to respect the earth, how to survive. Out in the forest, the hunters moved silently through the snow, their steps careful and soft. They knew where the deer would gather, how the wind would shift. Every breath of air, every broken branch told them something. They carried their knowledge like tools, invisible but sharper than any knife. Sometimes, when the night grew too cold, they turned to older ways still. Heated stones were placed beneath sleeping furs, wrapped in cloth to radiate warmth. Fires were built in pits, covered with ash to keep embers alive until dawn. Even in the open plains, the people found ways to make the earth itself their shelter. They carved windbreaks in the snow, buried themselves under hides, and slept in circles to share heat. And through all of this, through the frost, the long nights, the endless white, there was peace, because the people trusted the rhythm of the world. They did not ask it to change, they changed themselves. They learned to watch, to listen, to adapt. In a way, their greatest invention wasn't a tool or a structure, it was understanding. The frozen dawn of each winter wasn't something to fear. It was a beginning, a reminder that life endures, even when the world turns cold. And as the sun rose over the snowfields, painting everything in pale gold, the people would step outside their lodges, take a slow breath, and smile. The land was harsh, yes, but it was also home. The frost glittered on the branches, the fire cracked gently, and for one still perfect moment all was balanced. Cold and warmth, silence and life, human and earth, all in harmony. Long before calendars or weather forecasts, before anyone could look at a screen to know if snow was coming, the native peoples of America could feel winter approaching just by paying attention. They didn't guess, and they didn't fear the change. They listened to the world around them. Every sound, every scent, every flicker of movement in the forest told them something about what was to come. To live close to the land was to live in conversation with it. In the early autumn, when the air began to smell faintly of wood smoke and fallen leaves, the people already knew what kind of winter it would be. If the squirrels built thicker nests, it meant heavy snow. If the geese flew earlier and in lower lines, it meant deep cold. When the wind shifted direction and carried the dry rustle of frozen grass, they knew the first frost was close. The earth didn't speak in words, but it always told the truth, and those who listened carefully were never surprised by the seasons. The elders were the best listeners of all. They had seen more winters than anyone else, and they remembered them all. Their memories were not written down in books. They were carried in stories, in habits, in quiet warnings shared around the fire. An old man might tell the children, "The beavers built their dams high this year. That means the rivers will freeze deep." Or a grandmother might notice that the moon looked a little blurred through the evening clouds and say, "Snow will fall before 3 sunsets." These signs were never taken lightly. They were wisdom tested by centuries. Every tribe had its own way of reading the land. On the plains, people watched the buffalo. Their migration patterns told when the cold winds would sweep down from the north. In the woodlands, the people noticed the trees, when their bark thickened or cracked, when sap stopped flowing, when the sound of birds vanished into silence. Farther north, the Inuit watched the stars and the shape of the ice forming at the edges of the sea. Each sign was like a heartbeat in nature's great rhythm, reminding them that life always moved in cycles. They did not try to fight these cycles. Instead, they worked with them. When they felt the chill deepen at night, they began to dry their meat in smokehouses, tan fresh hides, and mend torn clothing. They checked their tools, their snowshoes, their sleds, their hunting bows, making sure nothing would fail them when the cold arrived. The preparation was not hurried. It was calm, deliberate, and full of trust in the knowledge that had been passed down from generation to generation. Children learned early how to recognize the signs, too. They were taught to watch the world closely, to be quiet, to see what others missed. A child might sit by a stream and notice that the water was slower, or that the fish stayed deeper below the surface. That was a lesson. Another might see that the deer had changed their paths through the forest, moving toward thicker cover. That was another. Each small observation was a piece of a much larger story, the story of the earth preparing for rest. And when the first frost finally arrived, there was no panic. The people did not run to find warmth. They had already made it. They had built their homes to face the right direction, sheltered from the wind. They had stored enough food and fuel to last through the storms. They had patched their clothing and gathered the herbs that could heal frostbite or fever. For them, winter was not a time of despair. It was simply the next verse in the song of life. There was beauty in this balance. When the snow began to fall, the world grew silent, and the people mirrored that silence. They moved slower, spoke softer, and watched the land rest. In that stillness, they found peace. The smoke from their fires curled into the pale sky, rising through the bare branches like prayers of warmth and gratitude. Sometimes, when the sky turned gray and the air grew heavy, a scout would walk out into the open plain to feel the coming of the storm. He would close his eyes, breathe in, and let the wind speak to him. He could tell if it carried snow or ice, if it would last one night or many. When he returned to the village, everyone listened. The earth had spoken through him. There was also a kind of spiritual understanding beneath this practical knowledge. Many tribes believed that winter was not just weather. It was a spirit, a presence that moved across the land. To survive it, you didn't conquer it. You respected it. You prepared an offering of food, or burned sweetgrass, or whispered words of welcome to the cold. Because if you treated winter as a friend, it would pass gently. But if you ignored it or tried to fight it, it could turn cruel. That way of thinking created harmony, a deep trust that even the hardest season had its purpose. Winter was the time when the soil slept so it could awaken in spring, when animals rested so they could bring new life, when people slowed down and drew close together. Every frost, every storm, every dark day had meaning. And when you believed that, even the coldest night became bearable. Those lessons came not from books, but from living, from generations of eyes watching the same hills, the same rivers, the same stars. Modern science can measure temperature and predict snow, but the ancient people felt it. They knew how the cold smelled, how it sounded, even how it tasted on the wind. It was not knowledge of numbers or data, but of relationship, a bond between the people and the earth that could not be broken. Even now, when the modern world hums with electric heat and glowing screens, we can still learn from that wisdom. Sometimes all it takes is stepping outside on a cold night, standing still, and listening. You might hear what they once heard. The whisper of wind through the trees, the slow breath of the earth turning beneath your feet, the promise that even in the chill of winter life is always preparing to bloom again. In the quiet heart of that ancient understanding, warmth was never just about fire. It was about awareness. Awareness of the land, of time, of community, and of one's place within the circle of life. The native peoples didn't simply survive winter. They became part of it, reading the land like a sacred book, written in snow, wind, and silence. And as the frost glistened on the horizon, they knew what so many have forgotten, that the earth always gives its warnings kindly, if we only learn how to listen. When the world outside froze and the winds howled across the plains, the homes of native peoples stood quietly, glowing from within like small embers scattered across a vast white world. They were not castles or mansions, not built from stone or brick, but from earth, wood, and hide, and yet they held something far greater than walls. They held wisdom. Each tribe built its home to fit the land it lived on, not to fight against it. The Lakota on the Great Plains, the Iroquois in the woodlands, the Inuit in the Arctic. All created shelters that were perfectly suited to their world. No two were quite the same, yet they shared a secret. They could breathe. A good home, the elders said, should be alive. It should let air move, let smoke escape, let warmth stay where it's needed. It shouldn't trap heat until it burns, or keep cold until it bites. It should breathe with the people who live in it, slow, steady, and balanced, just like the rhythm of the earth. On the open plains, the winter wind could be merciless, sweeping down in great gusts that froze the skin in seconds. But the people of those wide lands had long since learned to turn the wind's power to their advantage. They built tipis, tall and round, shaped like a cone so the wind would slide past instead of pushing against them. The poles of the teepee reached high and met at a single point above, leaving a small opening for smoke to drift away. Below, heavy buffalo hides stretched tight, secured to the ground with stones and pegs. When snow fell, it piled around the base, sealing the warmth inside even more. Inside a teepee, it was quiet. The fire burned in the center, small and steady. Above it, the air moved in slow spirals, carrying the smoke up and out through the top. Around the fire, families sat on soft hides, the walls glowing faintly from the light. The air was warm enough to sleep, yet fresh enough to breathe. No drafts, no suffocating heat, just balance. When storms came, the people adjusted the flaps at the top to control how much air entered and how much smoke left. It was simple, but it worked. A home that could adapt to the weather was a home that kept you alive. And when the tribe moved with the buffalo, the entire teepee could be taken down in an hour, packed onto a travois, and carried to the next camp. Warmth was never tied to one place. It traveled with the people. Farther east, in the thick forests, tribes like the Ojibwe and the Wampanoag built wigwams. These homes were round like the earth itself, made of wooden frames covered in bark, woven mats, or hides. Their curved shape helped shed rain and snow, while the layers of bark trapped air like insulation. Inside, a fire pit burned in the center, the smoke finding its way through a small hole in the roof. The walls, though made of natural materials, held the heat surprisingly well. Sometimes snow was packed along the outside to make them even warmer, nature's own insulation. The sound inside a wigwam on a winter night was soft and comforting. The fire whispered. The walls creaked gently as the wind moved outside, and the voices of family blended with the faint sigh of the flames. It wasn't silent. It was alive, full of warmth and breath and memory. In the far north, where winter was not just cold but eternal, the Inuit created something completely different: the igloo. At first thought, it seems impossible. A house made of snow. How could snow, frozen and fragile, protect anyone from the cold? But that was the brilliance of it. Snow is full of air, and air holds heat. The igloo wasn't just a pile of ice. It was a carefully shaped dome, built block by block, with each piece angled perfectly to lock into place. When the last block was set and the entrance carved, the people would crawl inside and light a small lamp made of seal oil. In minutes, the inside temperature would rise from below, freezing to almost room temperature. Their body heat stayed inside, trapped by the snow's insulation. Even their breath added moisture and warmth. Sometimes the top layer of the igloo would melt slightly, then refreeze, sealing every crack. It became as strong as stone, and yet, when the time came to leave, it melted back into the earth. Nothing wasted, nothing left behind. In the middle regions of the continent, tribes like the Mandan and Hidatsa built earth lodges. These were round, massive structures made of wood, grass, and packed soil. From the outside, they looked like small hills rising from the prairie, blending perfectly with the land. Inside, though, they were warm sanctuaries. The thick walls of dirt held in heat, and the low entrances kept the cold wind from rushing in. A single fire pit in the center provided light, warmth, and a place to cook. Families often shared these lodges, sometimes several at once. They slept close, wrapped in hides, sharing body heat. The walls glowed faintly with the fire's reflection, and the roof, made of logs covered with grass and clay, gave off the earthy scent of home. When storms howled across the plains, those inside the lodges heard only a muffled hum, as though the earth itself was singing them to sleep. Each type of shelter told a story about the people who built it. The teepee spoke of movement, of following herds and open skies. The wigwam spoke of forest life, of wood, bark, and rivers. The igloo spoke of endurance, of turning the harshest elements into safety. And the earth lodge spoke of community, of staying rooted in one place through the long winter months. There was a deep respect in all of these designs, not just for survival, but for balance. A home wasn't meant to conquer nature. It was meant to live alongside it. The walls weren't barriers, they were bridges between people and the world outside. Even the placement of homes mattered, facing away from the wind, near fresh water, beneath the shelter of trees. The people didn't force the land to change for them. They changed themselves for the land. And when the nights were longest and the stars burned clear in the black sky, these homes glowed softly like lanterns in the snow. Inside, people gathered around the fire, wrapped in warmth that came not just from flame or fur, but from connection. To each other, to the earth, and to the rhythm of life itself. Even today, if you've ever sat by a campfire on a cold night, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sparks drift into the dark, you felt a small piece of that same wisdom. The warmth you feel is not just heat, it's belonging. It's the same warmth that kept generations alive before the world was mapped, before history was written, before winter was just another season on a calendar. Their homes didn't just protect them from the cold. They reminded them that the earth always provides what is needed, if you learn how to listen and how to build with respect. Long before the hum of engines or the crackle of electric heat, warmth came from something alive, something that breathed and danced. Fire. It was more than light, more than heat. To the native peoples of ancient America, fire was a friend, a teacher, a spirit that connected the earth below and the sky above. Without it, winter could be death. But with it, the night became safe, even beautiful. Imagine it. The frozen plains stretched endless beneath a dark sky. The stars glittered sharp as glass. The air was so cold it made your breath shimmer like smoke. And there, in the center of the vast quiet, a small flame burned. Its orange light flickered across the snow, chasing away the shadows, turning the frost into silver. That tiny, defiant fire, that was life itself. But keeping that life alive was no small thing. Fire was sacred, and it demanded respect. You couldn't just light it and forget it. You had to feed it, talk to it, understand how it behaved. The elders said fire had moods, just like people. Calm when fed well, angry when ignored, and wild when disrespected. That's why every spark was tended with care. To start a fire in winter was almost like a ritual. Before the match, before metal tools, fire came from friction. 2 sticks, carefully chosen, rubbed together until smoke appeared. It took patience, steady hands, and a heart that didn't panic. Those who could do it well were admired, because to call forth fire from nothing was like calling the sun down to earth. The wood mattered too. Every kind of tree gave a different kind of flame. Cedar burned sweet and slow, its smoke curling like incense. Pine caught quickly but spat sparks if it was too green. Birch bark, thin and dry, was like nature's paper, perfect for kindling. Even dead grass and dry moss had their place, tucked beneath the wood to catch the first spark. It wasn't just about heat, it was about harmony, knowing which parts of the forest would burn kindly and which would fight back. Once the fire was alive, people gathered close. The circle around it wasn't just for warmth, it was for connection. Families sat shoulder to shoulder, their faces glowing red and gold. The youngest listened to stories. The elders spoke softly, their voices blending with the crackle of the flames. Outside the circle was darkness, deep, endless, filled with unknowns. Inside was safety. Inside was home. Some tribes believed fire carried messages to the spirits. The smoke that rose into the night was not wasted. It was a prayer, a breath offered to the ancestors. When the flames danced high, it meant the spirits were pleased. When it burned low, it meant something was wrong. Fire was a conversation, one that humans had been holding with the universe since the beginning. During the coldest months, fires never fully went out. Even when everyone slept, someone kept watch, tending the embers. A single glowing coal could be enough to start a new blaze in the morning. That ember, protected beneath ash, was life in its smallest, most fragile form, a heartbeat of warmth waiting for dawn. If the fire died, it wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a loss. So people learned to nurture it the way they nurtured their children, carefully, faithfully, with love. When the weather turned fierce, blizzards sweeping down from the north, snow piling high, winds howling, fire became a test of skill. The people built windbreaks from hides or logs, buried coals in pits, and kept dry kindling wrapped tight in animal skin. Even when rain or sleet soaked the land, they could coax a spark to life. It wasn't luck, it was knowledge, learned through hundreds of winters, passed down word by word, hand by hand. Fire was never wasteful. Every flame had a purpose. Some fires cooked food slowly, buried under stones or earth, filling the air with the smell of roasted meat. Others burned hotter, for shaping tools or hardening clay. A soft, steady fire warmed sleeping lodges, while a bright, quick flame lit the way for hunters returning home. People could read a fire yuga's behavior like a friend has expression. They knew when it was tired, when it was hungry, when it was content. And yet, beyond all the practical uses, fire had a kind of magic to it. On quiet nights, when the wind fell still, the stars above seemed to shimmer in rhythm with the flames below. Children would stare into the light eyes wide as the elders told stories of how fire first came to the people. Tales of a clever animal who stole it from the gods, or of lightning that struck the earth as a gift from the sky. In every version, fire was sacred, not owned but borrowed. It taught lessons, too. Fire could warm, but it could also destroy. A spark in the wrong place could turn forest to ash. So people learned balance, how to take what was needed without greed, how to build fire only where it belonged. It was a reflection of life itself, powerful, beautiful, but demanding respect. Sometimes on clear nights, families would carry their fires outside. They'd sit together beneath the stars, the flames flickering low, the world wrapped in cold silence. The Milky Way stretched like a river across the sky, and the snow glowed faintly in the starlight. Someone would add a stick to the fire, and for a moment, the light of earth and the light of heaven seemed to meet. Those nights had a stillness you could feel in your bones, the kind of peace that only comes when you know you belong, not above the earth, not separate from it, but as part of its quiet breathing. The people didn't need bright lights or noise to feel alive. They just needed that fire, that small, steady heart of warmth, and the company of those they loved. Even today, if you've ever sat by a campfire and watched the sparks float upward into the dark, you've seen what they saw. That same flame, that same warmth, that same quiet heartbeat of the world. Fire is the oldest story we still tell, a story of survival, of light, of home. And when the last ember fades, when the smoke rises into the sky, the lesson remains. Warmth is not something we make. It's something we share. When winter settled deep and the cold became a living thing that whispered through every tree, the people of ancient America did not run from it. They dressed for it. But their clothing was not like ours today. No zippers, no plastic, no factory-made coats. Every stitch, every thread, every layer came from the land itself. Their clothes were alive with warmth because they were made with understanding. Long before the first snow fell, preparations had already begun. During the warmer months, hunters brought back the hides of animals: deer, elk, bison, caribou, beaver, even rabbit. Each hide had a purpose, each fur a lesson in survival. They were never taken carelessly. When an animal gave its life, the people gave thanks. Nothing was wasted. The meat was eaten, the bones used for tools, the sinew for thread, and the hides for warmth. A good winter coat might begin with the soft hide of a deer, scraped clean and rubbed with fat to make it supple. Then came the fur, thick bison or bear, layered on the outside to block the wind. The sewing was done with bone needles and thread made from animal sinew, strong, flexible, and able to survive years of use. These garments were not just protection. They were a connection to the animals themselves, as if their spirit still lent its warmth to the one who wore it. Some tribes, like the Inuit in the far north, perfected this craft to an art. They made parkas from caribou hide, worn fur side in for softness and another layer fur side out for insulation. The hoods were lined with wolf or wolverine fur, because those animals' hairs didn't freeze when covered in frost. Every detail had meaning, even the shape of the sleeves, the way the seams were stitched, or the pattern of fur direction mattered. It was not fashion. It was knowledge, learned from centuries of observation. In the Great Plains, where the wind moved like a living blade, the people wore robes of buffalo hide. The hides were so large and thick that even when the snow blew hard, the person inside remained warm. Hunters wrapped themselves in these robes at night and slept under the open sky without freezing. The hair trapped warmth, the leather blocked the wind, and the smoke from fires helped waterproof the surface. Farther south in the woodlands, people combined deer hide with woven fibers from plants. They used bark cloth, softened and decorated, and layered it with fur in colder months. The colors were natural: browns, creams, grays, blending with the world around them. When they walked through the forest, they looked like part of the landscape, moving softly, quietly, unseen by prey or enemy. Every garment told a story. Patterns were painted or beaded onto hides, not for vanity, but for memory. A line of shapes might mark a successful hunt. A circle might honor the sun or the moon. A spiral could represent the journey of life. Even in the harshest cold, beauty was never forgotten. It was woven into the very fabric of survival. The clothing wasn't just about staying warm. It was about breathing with the land. Too much heat could be dangerous when you had to move, hunt, or travel long distances. So they learned to dress in layers, adjusting as the body needed. They understood something modern science would later confirm: that warmth isn't just about trapping heat, it's about managing it. Children wore miniature versions of adult clothing, made with the same care. A baby might be wrapped in rabbit fur, soft and warm, then placed in a cradleboard lined with moss for insulation. Elders often wore thicker robes and mittens of beaver or fox fur, their hands always tending the fire or guiding younger ones. In every home, clothing was part of daily life, drying by the fire, being repaired, softened with oils, or smoked for weatherproofing. When traveling, people adapted to every condition. In the Arctic, snow goggles carved from bone or wood protected eyes from blinding light. In the mountains, moccasins were lined with grass or fur to keep toes from freezing. In the plains, high boots kept snow from seeping in. The people didn't just endure the cold. They moved through it gracefully, almost effortlessly, because they were prepared in mind and in body. And still, their clothing carried spirit. Before putting on a new garment, many tribes would bless it, offering a quiet word of thanks to the animal that had given it. Some burned a small pinch of sage or cedar, letting the smoke touch the fur, believing it would carry the warmth of the earth into the clothing. They didn't see fur or hide as dead material. It was alive, part of the circle, part of the balance. There was also a kind of artistry in how they dressed. Feathers woven into hoods, beads sewn into seams, painted designs that shimmered in firelight. Small reminders that even in a world of snow and hardship, humans have always found beauty. A person fully dressed for winter looked not just protected, but noble, like the land itself had shaped them. When the snow fell thick and the air turned sharp, these garments became a second skin. You could walk through a storm that would freeze bare flesh in minutes and still feel warmth against your body. You could lie on the frozen ground and not feel the bite of ice. The clothing worked with nature, not against it. Breath, body, and fur created a system of perfect balance. Even today, explorers studying extreme cold often look back to those ancient designs. No synthetic fabric has yet matched the balance of fur and hide prepared by hand, smoked with care, and shaped by generations of experience. Modern coats may be lighter or brighter, but they lack that connection, that deep knowing of the world you live in. If you close your eyes now and imagine yourself in that world, you can almost feel it. The weight of fur across your shoulders, the faint scent of smoke in the fabric, the warmth of breath gathering inside your hood, and the slow rhythm of your footsteps through snow. You are warm, not because of machines or modern comforts, but because the earth itself has dressed you. Their clothing wasn't just protection from the cold. It was a reminder that warmth begins not with what you wear, but with what you understand. That to live well in the world, you must learn to live with it, not apart from it. When the world outside froze and rivers turned to mirrors of ice, the question of warmth went beyond fires and furs. It reached the belly. Food was not just sustenance, it was warmth that came from within, a spark that kept the body alive when the winds howled for days and nights on end. For the native peoples of ancient America, staying warm began long before winter's first snow. It began with preparation, quiet, patient, and wise. The first rule of surviving the cold was simple: respect the seasons. Nature gives in cycles, not all at once. When the summer sun was high and the berries ripened, people gathered them carefully, drying them in the open air on woven mats or flat stones. The sweetness would last for months, turning into chewy, concentrated energy when the trees went bare. Corn, squash, and beans, the three sisters, were harvested together, each helping the others grow and each feeding families through the dark. Nothing went to waste. Corn was ground into meal and stored in clay pots sealed with mud or bark. Dried beans rattled softly in their containers, a promise of nourishment waiting for the months ahead. Squash was sliced thin and dried in the sun, its bright flesh fading into golden strips that could be rehydrated in stew when the snow piled high. In the forests and plains, meat was prepared in the same spirit. Hunters didn't take more than they needed. When a buffalo or deer was killed, the meat was sliced thin, smoked or dried in the wind until it became tough and lightweight, jerky, though they had no name for it then. Sometimes it was mixed with fat and crushed berries to make pemmican, a kind of survival food that could last for months without spoiling. A single handful could keep a traveler strong through an entire day in the cold. In the far north, the Inuit had their own mastery of winter food. They ate seal, whale, and fish, not cooked in the way we think of, but preserved in the natural chill of the Arctic. Fat was not feared, it was life. It burned slowly in the body, creating heat that no fire could match. Even snow itself became part of the meal, melted for water, packed around stored food to keep it frozen and safe from scavengers. Nothing about it was wasteful or random, it was survival perfected. Each region had its own genius. In the woodlands, maple trees became silent givers. When the cold night softened into early spring, people would tap the trees, collecting sap that could be boiled into syrup or sugar. These stores of sweetness were precious, energy and comfort in one, like sunlight turned into food. In the desert Southwest, people grew maize and ground it into fine flour, mixing it with water and baking it into cakes that stayed fresh for weeks. On the coasts, fish were smoked, shellfish dried, seaweed gathered and pressed into cakes. But food wasn't only about what filled the stomach, it was about what filled the spirit. During the darkest months, when the wind moaned through the trees and daylight was short, people gathered to cook together. The air inside a lodge or wigwam would fill with the scent of roasting meat, boiling stew, or corn simmering with squash. The crackle of fire mixed with the bubbling of pots. Outside, the night stretched endless. Inside, there was warmth, laughter, and the comfort of knowing you would eat again tomorrow. Cooking itself was an art. Without metal pans or ovens, they used what nature offered. Hot stones dropped into water to make it boil, clay pots buried in ash, sticks used to turn meat slowly over flames. Some dishes took all day to make, not because they had to, but because time moved differently in winter. There was patience in every motion, rhythm in every task. Certain foods were considered gifts of warmth. Fat-rich meats, roasted nuts, and hearty stews that filled the belly and soothed the bones. Tea made from pine needles or dried herbs wasn't just a drink. It carried medicine, easing coughs and keeping the body strong. People knew what every plant could do, which roots could heal, which berries could harm. Knowledge was passed quietly, from mother to daughter, from elder to child, so that no one would face winter unprepared. Food was also shared, always. In hard winters, no one ate alone. If one family had plenty and another had little, the meal became larger, the portions divided. Generosity was a form of warmth, too, a fire that burned between hearts instead of logs. In many tribes, feeding a guest was sacred. Even if all you had was broth and a scrap of bread, it was offered with thanks, because sharing meant survival for everyone. There was also ceremony in eating. Before the first bite, people often gave thanks to the animals, to the plants, and to the spirits of the land. They understood something we often forget, that food isn't just something we take, it's something we're part of. When you eat, you become part of the earth's circle, and the earth becomes part of you. And then there were the quiet meals, taken by firelight, when snow fell softly outside and the world seemed still. Families would eat slowly, their breaths turning to small clouds, the children listening to stories told between spoonfuls. The stories were as nourishing as the food, tales of creation, of bravery, of lessons learned through hardship. They filled the heart as much as the stomach. Afterward, when the pots were empty and the fire burned low, someone would hang the remaining meat or dried goods high in the rafters, safe from animals. The scent of smoke would soak into everything, preserving it for another day. It was a small act, but it meant survival. One more sunrise, one more chance to wake warm and alive. Through it all, food remained something sacred, never wasted, never taken for granted. Even the scraps were used, bones boiled into broth, fat rendered into oil, seeds saved for spring planting. Nothing was simply thrown away. Every bite was part of a relationship between people, land, and the unseen spirits that held everything together. So when you think about how they stayed warm in winter, remember it wasn't only the fires or the furs. It was the food, the way it carried sunlight stored in summer, the way it bound people together through cold nights, the way it reminded them that the earth always gives, if you listen and prepare. Even now, if you sit beside a quiet fire, holding a bowl of hot stew or tea between your hands, you can feel a little of that same warmth, not just in your body, but in your soul. Because true warmth doesn't come from what you have, it comes from what you share. Snow, to most of us, is just white silence, something that falls from the sky and covers the ground, soft and cold. But to the people who lived their lives close to the land, snow was never just snow. It was a language, full of signs, messages, and quiet lessons that could mean the difference between safety and danger, between finding your way home or being lost to the storm. When the first flakes began to fall, the elders watched them closely. The way they moved in the air, the way they gathered on branches, the way they melted or stayed. It all spoke of what kind of winter was coming. Light, dry snow that danced on the wind meant cold days ahead. Heavy, wet flakes that clung to the trees meant milder weather, maybe rain soon to follow. The world was speaking, and they knew how to listen. For tribes who lived in the north or across the open plains, reading the snow was part of everyday life. The ground became a storybook, written in prints, trails, and patterns. A hunter could glance at a patch of snow and see a tale unfold. The paw of a fox chasing a rabbit, the deep imprints of a moose passing hours earlier, the light steps of a bird taking off into the air. Even the way the snow was crushed or scattered told something about how fast the animal had been moving, whether it was calm or frightened. Children learned early that snow carried memories. Their elders would take them walking after a fresh snowfall and point to the ground, showing how the smallest mark could reveal a whole story. "See this line here," they might say. That's a mouse tunneling just beneath the surface. Look how it curves. He's heading toward the nearest tree for seeds. Or they'd point to a hollow where the snow looked slightly melted. That's where a deer rested last night. You can still feel the warmth beneath it. Even the wind had a language written across the snow's surface. When the gusts were strong, they carved waves and ridges called sastrugi, sharp and beautiful, but also warnings. The direction of those lines showed where the storm came from and whether it would return. Hunters far from home could read them like a compass, guiding themselves back toward safety long before stars or sun were visible again. To outsiders, it might have seemed like magic, but to those who lived it, it was simply awareness, a kind of quiet intelligence shaped by patience. You learned the world not by forcing it to speak, but by waiting long enough to hear what it already said. Snow also carried the voices of sound. In the stillness of deep winter, every noise changed. Fresh snow absorbed sound, making the forest seem hushed and far away. You could walk for miles and hear nothing but the faint crunch beneath your feet. But when the air grew colder, below freezing, the snow became brittle. It squeaked, cracked, and sang with every step. The people knew these sounds, and they knew what they meant. Crisp snow meant clear skies and colder nights ahead. Soft snow meant warmth returning, even if only for a while. Then there was ice, the snow's other face. A frozen river could be a road or a trap, depending on how you read it. The surface color, the sound of cracking beneath your weight, the way the frost patterns formed, all these told you whether it was safe to cross. The people learned to test it with a staff, to listen for the deep echo that meant strength, and to avoid the spots where the water still whispered beneath. Snow could protect as well as warn. In the coldest regions, travelers built shelters from it, digging small hollows, shaping walls that trapped air and blocked the wind. It seemed strange that something so cold could keep you warm, but it worked because they understood its structure. Snow held air inside, and air held heat. What others might have called freezing, they turned into safety. Even the animals taught lessons through snow. The way wolves packed down paths in the drifts showed the easiest routes to follow. Birds flew low before heavy storms, warning people to stay close to camp. The snow itself glittered differently before certain weather, sometimes dull, sometimes sharp, depending on the light in the air. The people didn't need forecasts or calendars. The world told them everything they needed to know. They only had to look, and there was beauty in it, too. The sight of moonlight on fresh snow, the way it glowed pale blue in the quiet night, the feeling of your breath turning into tiny clouds as you watched your own footprints disappear behind you. These were moments not of fear, but of peace. The earth was sleeping, and you were part of its dream. Sometimes when storms raged and no one could go outside, families would sit around the fire and tell stories about snow spirits, beings who shaped the world, eased cold places, who guided the lost, who punished greed, and who rewarded those who respected the balance. The snow, they said, remembered kindness. Step gently on it, share your fire, honor your food, and the cold would not harm you. But walk carelessly, take too much, forget gratitude, and the snow would take you in return. In that way, snow became more than weather. It became a teacher. Patient, honest, sometimes cruel, but always wise. It reminded people that the world was alive, always watching, always speaking in a language older than words. Even now, when we look at a field after a snowfall, untouched, perfect, silent, there's a strange calm that falls over us. It's the same feeling they knew long ago, that deep quiet that makes you listen to your own heartbeat and realize how small you are, and yet how connected you remain. To the people who once walked those white landscapes, snow was never an enemy. It was a mirror, reflecting the world, the sky, and the heart of anyone willing to slow down long enough to see it. There is a moment in every deep winter when movement feels impossible. The air itself seems heavy, the world frozen in place, and even sound feels slow. In that moment, those who lived close to the earth knew something simple but profound. To survive the cold, you didn't always have to fight it. Sometimes you had to move with it. You had to become still. Stillness wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. The animals knew it too. The bear sleeping in its den, the fox curling its tail around its nose, even the tiny mouse tunneling beneath the snow. The cold rewarded those who learned to wait, to slow down, to use only the energy they truly needed. The people watched and learned from this. The quiet was not something to escape, but something to live inside. During the long nights when the wind scraped across the plains or moaned through the trees, the people stayed close to the fire, conserving every bit of warmth. Movements were small, deliberate. A hand stirred the pot. Another laid a stick on the coals. There was no rushing, no wasted motion. In that rhythm of slowness, their bodies stayed warm. Every movement had meaning. The elders often said, "The body listens to the mind. If your spirit is calm, your body will follow." They believed that fear and panic wasted energy, like holes in a warm blanket. But peace, quiet, focused peace, kept heat inside. When storms howled, when the snow piled high, when days passed without sunlight, they sat still, listening to the fire's whisper and their own steady breath. Their homes were built for this kind of quiet. Inside the round lodges, heat gathered near the ground, wrapping around them like a blanket. The thick hides and packed earth trapped the warmth, but it was their patience that kept it steady. Children learned early that running or shouting wasted energy. Instead, they played quietly, carving small figures from wood, braiding string, or listening to stories. Hunting trips in the deep cold were no different. The hunters who walked too fast or breathed too hard would sweat, and that sweat would freeze. The wise ones moved like shadows, slow and light, breathing through their noses to keep the air warm as it entered their lungs. They became part of the silence, blending with the snow and the wind. Sometimes they would pause for hours, standing motionless, waiting for the deer to come to them. The stillness itself became a kind of strength, a warmth from within. There was also another kind of stillness, one of the spirit. When the days grew short and the sun disappeared behind gray clouds, it was easy to feel heavy, to feel alone. The people understood that this was when the heart needed tending, just like the fire. So they gathered together. They sang low songs, steady and slow, songs that matched the rhythm of breathing. The music filled the air like heat, invisible but powerful. Elders told stories not just to pass the time, but to keep hope alive. They spoke of spring, of green shoots that would rise again, of rivers that would thaw, of sunlight that would return. Each word was a promise, each memory a spark, and as they spoke, you could feel it. The cold lost its sharpness. The mind, wrapped in these stories, stayed warm. Even the way they slept followed the rhythm of stillness. Families slept close, bodies curled together beneath hides. Children nestled between parents or grandparents, their breath mingling, their heartbeats sinking into one calm pulse. The air was cool but never biting, the fire burning low beside them. Outside, the night raged, but inside, time seemed to pause. Sometimes, in the middle of those long nights, someone would wake and simply listen, to the wind brushing the walls, to the distant crack of ice on the river, to the deep, breathing silence of a world asleep. There was a peace in it, a reminder that life continued quietly, patiently, even beneath the frozen surface. Stillness, they believed, wasn't the absence of life. It was life at its gentlest pace. The earth itself rested in winter. Trees stood bare but alive. Seeds slept beneath the snow, waiting for the warmth to return. The people followed that same pattern, not pushing against nature's rhythm, but flowing with it. They ate less, moved less, spoke less, saving strength for the seasons to come. In that way, warmth became something more than physical. It was a state of being, a harmony between body, mind, and the world around. To be still was to trust the earth, to know that the cold would not last forever. Modern life often forgets this kind of patience. We rush, even when the world tells us to rest. But if you've ever sat quietly on a cold morning, with your hands wrapped around a mug, and felt a slow calm spreading through your chest, you felt what they knew. That stillness is a kind of fire, too, one that burns without wood or smoke, one that lives inside you. The elders used to say that warmth begins not with fire, but with peace. When you are calm, you can endure any winter. The world may be frozen, the night endless, but inside there is a small, steady glow that never fades, and that was their secret, one we can still carry. To survive the cold, don't always move faster. Sometimes just breathe slower, listen, be still, and let the warmth of life find you where you are. When winter came to the old lands of North America, it did not come gently. The cold stretched endlessly, the snow climbed high against the doors of lodges, and the wind sounded like voices calling from another world. Alone, no one could endure it for long. But together, in community, people not only survived, they thrived. The secret to warmth wasn't just fire or fur, it was people. It was the closeness of bodies, the sharing of food, the comfort of hearing another person's breath in the dark. Community was the real fire that burned through the heart of winter. In every village or camp, life moved to a shared rhythm. The cold made everyone equal. Hunter, elder, child, all needed each other. A hunter could bring home a deer, but without the women to clean and preserve the meat, it would spoil. The women could sew hides into clothing, but without the men to gather wood, the fire would die. The elders carried the stories and the wisdom, guiding decisions through the hardest days. The children reminded everyone what they were fighting for. Survival wasn't just an act of endurance, it was a dance of connection. Inside their homes, warmth was built layer by layer, not only from fire, but from togetherness. Families slept close under thick hides, shoulder to shoulder, their heat shared. Sometimes several families would gather in one large lodge, each bringing their own fire, their own laughter. When they breathed together, the air itself seemed to grow heavier, richer, alive with the hum of life. Sharing was sacred. In the heart of winter, no one ate alone if someone nearby was hungry. The rule was simple. What you had, you shared. A single pot of stew could feed many mouths if everyone gave a little. When someone had more dried meat, they brought it to the elders. When another had extra firewood, they left it by a neighbor's door. There were no written laws for this. It was the way of life, the way of survival. Kindness, in that frozen world, wasn't a luxury. It was strength. Even laughter was part of survival. On the coldest nights when the wind moaned outside, people told funny stories to chase away fear. Someone would tease another about a clumsy fall in the snow, or a time they scared themselves thinking a shadow was a bear. The children giggled, the elders smiled, and for a few moments the storm outside didn't seem so large. Joy in the middle of hardship became its own kind of heat. Then there were the stories, told softly by firelight in voices that rose and fell like the wind. Each story carried not just entertainment, but memory. They told of ancestors who had survived winters even harsher than this one, who had found food when the world seemed empty, who had seen spring return against all odds. These stories were not fairy tales. They were maps of the human spirit. They taught courage without saying the word. They kept hope alive without needing to name it. When sickness struck, and it always did in the cold, people didn't face it alone. Healers visited every home, carrying bundles of herbs and steaming bowls of broth. Neighbors sat outside waiting to help, offering extra blankets or warm stones wrapped in cloth to ease pain. The people believed that healing came not just from medicine, but from love, from the simple act of caring. Children were never left to feel afraid. If the night grew too long or the wind too loud, someone would hum a song. A grandmother's voice, low and steady, would wrap around them like a blanket. The rhythm of that song, slow, repetitive, ancient, matched the sound of the crackling fire. Before long the child's breathing would slow, the fear would fade, and sleep would come. In many ways, winter became the season of connection. When the land was buried in snow and there was little work to do outside, families spent time simply being together. They repaired tools, told stories, taught children, made plans for the seasons to come. They used the stillness of the cold months to remember what truly mattered. Not the hunt, not the harvest, but the bond that held them all. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, someone might step outside the lodge. The stars would hang bright above the frozen world, and smoke from the fires would rise like spirits. The silence was vast, almost frightening. But then they'd look back and see the faint orange glow leaking from under the lodge door, hear the muffled laughter or soft snoring from inside. And suddenly, the world didn't feel empty. It felt full of life, of warmth, of love woven through the cold like threads of gold. It's easy to think of survival as something physical, about strength or skill or luck. But the truth is, the people who lived through those endless winters understood something deeper. Survival was emotional. It was about belonging. The cold could take your fire, your food, even your shelter, but if you had people, you still had warmth. And that idea carried through generations. Even now, if you visit those lands and meet their descendants, you'll feel it. That same sense of community, of closeness, of quiet care. The spirit of survival never left. It simply changed shape, from campfires to families, from snow lodges to neighborhoods, but the heartbeat remains the same. Because the real warmth, the kind that never fades, is not in the fire. It's in each other. Fire was more than warmth. It was life itself, a living being, a companion, and a teacher that glowed softly in the center of every winter night. For the people who lived close to the earth, fire was never taken for granted. It wasn't simply a tool they made, it was a relationship they tended. Each flame had meaning. When the fire crackled happily, it was said to be content, enjoying the dry wood and calm air. When it hissed and spat, it was angry or hungry, warning that the logs were wet or that the wind was too strong. The people listened to these sounds as if they were language, because in a way they were. Fire spoke to those who paid attention. At the center of every home, the hearth burned day and night. It was rarely allowed to die. Even when families traveled, someone would carry an ember wrapped in bark or clay, keeping the fire's heart alive until it could be reborn in a new place. This wasn't superstition. It was gratitude. Fire gave light when the world was dark. It cooked food, dried clothes, and drove away wild animals. It was warmth made visible, and it deserved respect. Children learned early how to feed a fire gently. Too much wood, and it choked. Too little, and it starved. The elders taught them to kneel close, to feel the heat on their skin, to notice how the flames moved. They were told that fire had a spirit, that if you treated it kindly, it would protect you, but if you disrespected it, it could turn wild and unforgiving. In the deep cold of winter, the fire was the center of everything. People sat in a circle around it, speaking softly, sharing food, telling stories. The light flickered on their faces, making the shadows dance. Every movement, stirring the coals, placing a log, was part of a rhythm older than memory. Fire didn't just give warmth, it brought people together, and fire remembered things. When hunters returned from long journeys, they would sit by it and let the heat soak through their bones. They'd stare into the flames, watching them twist and shift, seeing shapes appear and vanish, faces, animals, places far away. The fire told stories in its own way, through color and movement, sometimes red, sometimes blue, sometimes white at its hottest. To the people, each hue meant something: energy, spirit, transformation. There were rules about fire, spoken and unspoken. Never spit into it. That was an insult. Never leave it unattended. That was carelessness. Never step over it. That was disrespect. When it was time to sleep, the fire wasn't put out roughly. It was put to rest. A little ash was spread to protect the embers, a log placed gently to keep the glow alive until morning. Sometimes, when storms were fierce and wind howled through the cracks, the people would tell stories about how the first fire came to them. Some said it was a gift from the sky, stolen from lightning and shared by animals. Others said the Great Spirit had hidden it inside the heart of a tree, waiting for someone patient enough to find it. Whatever the version, one truth stayed the same. Fire was sacred because it connected the heavens, the earth, and humankind. And if you've ever sat by a campfire at night, if you've felt that quiet pull, that hypnotic calm as you watch the flames move, then you felt what they knew. Fire didn't just warm the body, it quieted the mind. It gave people a place to think, to remember, to dream. For hunters lost in the wilderness, fire was hope. The moment they lit one, fear eased. The dark didn't seem so endless anymore. Its glow meant safety. It meant home. And for those in the villages, firelight was the heartbeat of winter life, a pulse that reminded everyone that the world, though cold, was still alive. Even in ceremonies, fire played a role. Flames were lit to honor ancestors, to guide spirits, or to mark new beginnings. Smoke rose to the sky like a prayer, carrying the breath of those who still lived to those who came before. In that rising smoke, the people saw connection between past and present, between the human and the divine. Fire was never silent. It whispered constantly, shifting and sighing. Some said you could hear voices in it if you listened closely, not words exactly, but feelings. Warmth, warning, gratitude, even sorrow. It was the sound of life continuing, even when everything outside was frozen and still. And maybe that's why fire has always felt so human. It breathes, it eats, it dances. It dies if neglected, but thrives when cared for. It mirrors us, fragile yet powerful, dangerous yet beautiful. The people knew this balance and respected it deeply. They didn't try to control the fire. They worked with it, as one would with a friend. It was a partnership built over centuries, one that carried them through countless winters. If you close your eyes now, you can almost feel it. That soft warmth, the faint crackle of wood, the smell of smoke curling into the air. You can imagine sitting in that ancient circle, wrapped in furs, faces glowing in orange light. Outside, the snow falls silently, but inside, there is only peace. Fire flickers, life continues, and the night hums with quiet contentment. The wisdom of fire wasn't about burning brighter, it was about lasting longer, about learning when to feed the flame, when to let it rest, and when to simply watch it dance. And so, through every storm, every long night, every winter that tested the soul, the people kept their fire alive, in their homes, in their hearts, and in the stories they passed on. Because fire, like love, like community, was never just something they had. It was something they were. In the long winters of the ancient world, when snow covered everything and the nights stretched on without end, the people didn't see cold as just weather. They felt it as presence, alive, aware, watching. To them, the cold itself had a spirit, sometimes kind, sometimes cruel, depending on how it was treated. They believed that everything in nature had its own breath, its own will. The wind was not empty air. It was a messenger, carrying whispers from the mountains and forests. The frost that crept across the ground was not random. It was the footprint of something greater, invisible but near. The people gave names to these unseen beings, not out of fear, but out of respect. When the first snow fell, it was said to be the work of an old woman's spirit. She was the winter mother, her long white hair made of ice, her breath the north wind. She wasn't evil, but she could be harsh. She brought silence to the forests so that life could rest. She covered the rivers to protect the fish below, but if humans mocked her or wasted her gifts, She would turn bitter and send storms to remind them of their place in the world. So the people greeted her arrival with calm hearts. They burned sweetgrass or cedar in the fire, letting the smoke drift upward, a gentle offering. They said quiet prayers, not to beg for warmth, but to thank her for the stillness she brought. Winter, they believed, was not punishment. It was balance. It was the earth's way of breathing out. At night, when the air was clear and the stars shimmered like ice shards, some said they could hear the voices of the cold spirits singing across the plains. The sound was faint, carried by the wind, like the echo of a flute. Children were told not to answer those songs, not because they were dangerous, but because the spirits might mistake a reply for an invitation and follow them home. The elders said that the spirits of the cold were curious, not cruel. They liked warmth, but they couldn't touch it. So they drifted close to campfires and lodges, hovering near the smoke, listening to laughter and conversation. Sometimes, when the wind shifted suddenly or the fire flared up for no reason, people would smile and say, "They're visiting." Respect was everything. When hunters went out into the snow, they always moved with quiet steps. They never shouted or cursed the cold. They thanked the wind for showing their breath, proof that they were still alive. They thanked the frost for reminding them to be careful. Even when their fingers ached and the cold bit deep, they understood. The world was not against them. It was testing them, shaping them. In the deepest winter nights, when storms screamed and snow fell sideways, the people stayed inside and told stories about the spirits who walked those storms. There was the Frost Man, who carried a staff made of frozen river water. Wherever he pointed, the air turned white and hard. There were the Ice Wolves, made of snow and moonlight, who howled only to warn travelers not to stray too far from home. And there were the Star Dancers, spirits who flickered above the northern horizon, their green and blue light swaying gently across the sky. The people called that shimmering light the breathing of the world. Some said it was the ancestors lighting their torches in the heavens, watching over the living below. Others said it was the cold spirits themselves, showing their beauty to those who were brave enough to look up during the darkest hours. Inside the lodges, firelight reflected in the children's eyes as they listened. Each story was a soft thread connecting them to the land, a reminder that every gust of wind, every snowflake, every silent drift of ice had meaning. The world wasn't empty. It was full. Even fear had its place. If a storm lasted too long or the cold became too deep, the people didn't curse it. They sat quietly, waiting, trusting that the spirits would pass when ready. They knew that the world moved in cycles. Warmth and cold, life and rest, noise and silence. Fighting those rhythms only brought exhaustion. But patience brought peace. Sometimes, after a storm, when the sky cleared and the world turned silver beneath the moon, people would step outside and listen. The snow creaked underfoot, the trees shimmered with frost, and the air was so cold it almost rang. In that moment, they said, you could feel the spirits closest, not as something to fear, but as something vast, ancient, gentle, and wise. The cold taught them humility. It reminded them that no matter how clever or strong humans became, they were still part of nature, not above it. The cold didn't bow to anyone. It simply existed, honest and absolute. And those who learned to live with it, not against it, found a kind of quiet strength that could not be broken. Even now, if you stand in a snowy forest at night and let the wind brush against your skin, you might understand what they felt. The chill doesn't just touch your body. It reaches deeper, into memory, into something older than language. You realize that the cold isn't empty at all. It's alive. It's aware. It's watching softly, waiting for you to listen. Because the spirits of the cold, like all things in the natural world, still move among us. We just forget how to hear them. For months, the land had slept under snow. The trees stood silent and gray, the rivers locked in white silence, and the air so cold it seemed to hum. But one morning, no one ever knew exactly when, something changed. A sound, a smell, a feeling, subtle at first, almost a whisper. The people would pause, lift their heads, and know. The world was turning again. The first sign wasn't always what you might think. It wasn't a bright flower or a clear patch of grass. It was the sound of water. Deep under the snow, where ice met soil, little trickles began to move. They whispered like tiny voices running between stones, soft but full of promise. Hunters walking the old trails would stop and kneel, pressing their hands to the ground, feeling that faint vibration of life returning. The animals knew it, too. Ravens began to call more often, their deep cries echoing through the thinning air. Foxes left fresh tracks in the snow, lighter now, their coats beginning to shed their winter weight. Even the wind seemed to change its tone, less sharp, more restless, carrying with it the smell of thawing earth. Inside the lodges, people began to stir differently. The fires burned a little less fiercely. Wood piles no longer dwindled as fast. Children who had spent months bundled in furs now dared to step outside without heavy wrappings, their laughter rising like birdsong in the crisp morning. The cold still lingered, yes, but it no longer ruled. The elders watched these changes closely. They could read the signs better than anyone. The way smoke rose straight into the air meant calm weather was coming. The way the stars shifted in the night sky told them that the sun's path was changing. Even the snow itself told a story. It grew heavier, wetter, softer to the touch. Soon it would melt. Soon the land would breathe again. Then came the great melt, slow, deliberate, and full of sound. Icicles fell like tiny spears, breaking into sparkling shards. Snowbanks shrank, revealing forgotten footprints, dropped tools, and the bones of old fires buried beneath. Streams overflowed, turning paths into rivers. The earth drank deeply, waking from its long thirst, and with the melt came color. Faint at first, brown, gray, the deep green of moss pushing through the ice. Then brighter things followed, buds swelling on willow branches, blades of grass curling through mud, flashes of red and yellow as birds returned from the south. The world seemed to sigh in relief. For the people, this was a sacred time. The first thaw meant more than warmth. It meant renewal. It was proof that balance still held, that the earth, in her patience, had forgiven another winter of human struggle. They celebrated not with feasts or grand rituals, but with quiet gratitude. A meal shared outside, a song sung to the rising sun, a walk through the melting woods. Every step was a prayer. Women gathered to wash clothes in the streams, laughing as the icy water splashed their hands. Men repaired fishing nets and bows, knowing that soon rivers would flow freely again. Children ran barefoot through puddles, their laughter echoing across the land like the first call of spring itself. And yet, even as life returned, the people didn't forget what winter had taught them. They had learned patience, stillness, respect. Those lessons didn't melt with the snow. They carried them forward, into planting, into hunting, into the new warmth that would follow. Sometimes an elder would remind the young ones, spring doesn't rush. The earth wakes slowly. It was a warning against impatience. Even as the world softened, sudden cold could return. Frosts could still bite. The balance of seasons had to be respected. Every stage, every pause, every breath. At night, when the stars gleamed above rivers still half frozen, the people gathered around smaller fires. Their songs changed, lighter, gentler, no longer prayers for survival, but songs of thanks. They spoke of animals returning, of new growth, of journeys that could now begin again. One night, when the first frogs began to sing from the marshes, the people smiled. That was the surest sign of all. Frogs meant the earth was warm again, that life had truly awakened. The sound was everywhere, soft, rhythmic, ancient, a chorus of renewal, and if you stood there, just listening, you could feel it too. The same rhythm that had pulsed through every spring since the beginning of time. the same slow heartbeat of a planet that rests, then rises again. For the people who had lived through the long freeze, there was no greater joy than this, not just warmth, but the return of balance. They knew the cold would come again someday, as it always did, but for now, the earth had opened her eyes. The wind no longer whispered warnings. It carried hope. The rivers no longer hid under ice. They laughed and tumbled in the sun. The fires burned lower, gentler, as if even they wanted to rest. And as the people walked through the soft mud and melting snow, they could feel something deep inside them change too, the slow, ancient rhythm of survival shifting into one of gratitude. The cold had not beaten them. It had taught them how to wait, how to listen, how to be still. And now, as the world stretched and yawned beneath the returning sun, they remembered the truth their ancestors always knew, that warmth is sweetest only after the cold. The snow had melted. The rivers ran clear and strong again. The land that once lay frozen beneath heavy skies now glowed with new life. But even as the people stepped into spring, they carried winter with them. Not as burden, but as memory, as wisdom. Because every winter taught something. It taught how to endure, how to share, how to listen. It taught that the earth gives and takes in equal measure, and that survival was never about conquering the cold, but learning to live in rhythm with it. The elders would tell the young ones, "The land remembers." And they were right. Every hill, every tree, every frozen lake held stories of hunger and laughter, of silence and song. The earth carried those memories like scars, gentle reminders of what it meant to live close to nature. Even now, when you walk through the forest in early spring, you can feel that same echo. The stillness beneath the trees, the scent of damp soil, the faint chill in the air. It's all a whisper of what came before, a reminder that warmth always returns, but only because the world learned how to rest. The people never wasted what winter had given them. They repaired their homes with the patience learned from snowstorms. They planned their hunts with the caution taught by long nights. And when they sat by the fire, they spoke quietly, with gratitude, because they knew how quickly silence could return. Generations passed, and the world changed. Villages became towns, lodges became houses, and modern fires burned behind glass and metal instead of wood and stone. But somewhere in the rhythm of it all, that old knowledge remained, buried deep, like embers still glowing beneath ash. Even today, in moments of stillness, when you wrap yourself in a blanket on a cold morning, when you feel the first warmth of sunlight after a long night, when you listen to the quiet of falling snow, you are remembering what the ancients knew, that peace isn't found in comfort, but in connection. The native peoples didn't just survive the cold, they understood it. They saw the world not as enemy or obstacle, but as teacher. They listened to the wind, learned from the animals, and trusted the cycles of time. In their eyes, warmth wasn't something to chase. It was something to create. In the way they treated one another, in the way they cared for the land, in the way they moved through life with patience and grace. And maybe that is the wisdom we've forgotten, that the earth doesn't move faster because we hurry. The seasons don't listen to clocks. They listen to balance. The world still breathes at its own pace, slow and steady, and those who match its rhythm find peace no matter the season. So, as the night falls and the air grows cool again, imagine that old campfire still glowing somewhere in the distance, its light flickering softly against the walls of an ancient lodge. Inside, a circle of people sit close, their voices low, their laughter gentle. Outside, the stars shine bright above a world both harsh and kind. They don't speak of fear. They don't rush. They simply live, knowing that warmth, like hope, like love, is something we make for each other. And that's what they left behind. Not just tools or shelters or songs, but understanding. A way of being that reminds us that every dark night, every storm, every frozen moment carries within it the quiet promise of light. Because the truth is simple. Winter never truly ends. It only sleeps, just as we do. But spring always finds its way back, and life always continues. So rest easy tonight. Listen to the quiet. Somewhere, deep beneath the earth, warmth is already returning. And so, as the last embers of our story fade, we return to the quiet warmth of now. We've walked through frozen forests, sat beside ancient fires, and listened to the wind carry the voices of those who came before us. The people of the old winters didn't just survive the cold. They understood it. They saw nature not as something to conquer, but as something to live alongside. Maybe that is the lesson we can take with us tonight, that peace doesn't come from having more, but from needing less, from finding warmth not just in fire but in patience, in kindness, and in one another. If you enjoyed this slow journey through history, don't forget to gently tap the like button. It helps more dreamers find their way here. And if you'd like to travel through more forgotten worlds, stories, and soft histories, you can subscribe. I'll be here every week to tell you another one. Until next time, rest easy, dream warmly, and may your night be as calm as a snow-covered forest under starlight.